How are you? Eric Crevilla with Bentley Systems, Construction Solutions Director for Bentley. I'm also the chair of the Advanced Work Packaging Community of Business Advancement. I'm also a member of the Strategic Planning Committee. I remember when I first got invited to participate in the SBC, Stephen Malva asked me to come up with what's our future leader type of program, what's our young professionals, what's our next gen type of program. So I created a bit of a PowerPoint, talked to a whole bunch of people, and then after a while it just kind of didn't go anywhere. And then after a couple months ago when we started talking about the conference, next thing you know, it's on the agenda for this conference to have a next gen think tank. So, you know, I guess my experience is being part of a future leader program many eons ago qualified me to participate and be a part of the next gen from an advisory perspective and looking at it from an SPC perspective. So I'd like to introduce our next gen future leader type of program here, and our moderators here, Mona Haggag and Kelcey Henderson, are both our moderators for this, if you will. And then we have Colin Tsui, right? And Jodie Leeka, right? And Melissa Marcum. So let you guys take it over. Go ahead, Kelcey.
Awesome. So I'm Kelcey Henderson, president of Continuum Advisory Group. And Mona Haggag and I came in Monday afternoon to lead a think tank of next generation leaders. And this group was charged with reimagining what the industry association would look like for the next generation. So aligning with our conference theme this week around imagination and the value of transformative possibilities. So in a very short period of time, just 2 hours working together on Monday afternoon, this group came up with 3 very important top priorities for how we would reimagine CII, how we would make it the industry association that really appeals the most to the next generation and provides them with the value that they seek when they participate and engage in associations. And so before I hand it over for these 3 to tell you a little bit more about those priorities, I want to just quickly recognize everybody who participated on Monday. So if you were in that think tank Monday afternoon, just go ahead and stand up for a second. So we had a group of just 20 people, really, really short session, very collaborative, really engaging. I think for a group of next generation leaders, of younger professionals in the industry, it was really powerful to me that everybody came together, worked collaboratively on Monday afternoon. Not a single person put their laptop on the table. I didn't see any iPads out. There were no cell phones. Everybody was really, really engaged. And so in a short period of time, we came up with these top 3 priorities, presented those out to the Strategic Planning Committee, and then had a nice discussion with them about what the next steps are and what this group is going to be charged with going forward. So with that, I will hand it over to Jodie to tell you a little bit more about what we did.
Great. Thank you. Just to set the stage a little bit more, we've talked about next gen. Why is that important? Well, if you look around the room, I would say that there aren't that many people in the next gen who are here. And people have talked about that being an issue because we need to continue to be bringing in the next generation and generations of people in the industry. So we really put our heads together to think about how do we engage our peers and those even more junior than we are in sustainable ways for CII and for them to be benefited by CII. So the first priority that I'll talk about is what we're calling the local connections. Everyone comes to conference, we have a great time, we learn a lot, and then we all go back to our local offices, our project sites, and some of us bring that knowledge and connections back with us, but a lot of us don't. So how can we take advantage of the fact that many of us live and work in similar communities? We have several people in a lot of the major cities in this country and around the world, so we want to take advantage of that. So these local connections we envision as meeting a few times a year in certain cities at first. That can grow if it's working, and with a couple of goals in mind. And let me clarify a little bit about what those are and what they're not. We're by no means trying to compete with or detract from the existing committees of CII or the research or what happens in this global community. We are, however, trying to build upon those, like arms reaching out into our communities so that we can connect with each other and really take things that we learn when we are together a step further. It's also relational for everybody. This isn't only for Next Gen. This is for you, for your neighbor, and for the people in your company who aren't here. We highly encourage everyone to see this as a lower barrier of entry than taking time off of work, coming to a conference, the costs associated, and even the learning curve. Colin will speak a little bit more to that, but CII is an awful lot of information to digest at once. So it's a lot easier for you to say to a junior person on your team or a potential new member company in your city, hey, come with me to this luncheon, and we can talk about some of the industry findings these days or some topics, talk with some of our peers. That's a lower barrier of entry to start introducing people and getting them plugged in. Then when people come to conference, they have context, they have connections, and can be more meaningfully involved. So that's our local connections idea. We already have some traction gained with some pilots in a few cities of San Francisco, Houston, and DC. If you're there, please reach out. We'd love to get you connected to that. If your city wasn't one of those three, reach out as well. We'd love to see where this can grow into. I'll also say that the real emphasis here is relationships and actually becoming actionable with what we learn about and talk about here so that we can interact more consistently throughout the year and more meaningfully as well. With that, I'll hand it over to Melissa to address our second priority.
Thank you. Thanks, Jodie. To build exactly on what Jodie just talked about, another priority based on this local formation of a knowledge group would be to build on how we would actually perform research. So we actually brought into the theme of the conference, we call it Research Reimagined. So we said, what would it look like if we had more opportunities than just research teams to participate on? So we know that research teams can go 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, depending on whatever the initiative is. So we said, what would happen if we had this local group together and we started with idea generation? So we could have a Kaizen type event. Everybody's probably familiar with that, with the Six Sigma term. We could also do some kind of focus groups as well and come up with some really great ideas and quick wins that we may be able to build upon and really allow that next generation to take over and be able to take something back to their company. So we heard yesterday from one of the speakers talk about what would happen if we were to get the right 4 or 5 people sitting at a table for a couple hours. What would be the outcome? We could solve some problems. And that's exactly what we thought as a Next Gen team. We said, that's a really great idea, and this local formation could really help us get there. And eventually, if it's something that we thought would be a little bit more, would need to be done with PhDs and other people involved, then we could always turn it into a research team. So we saw it as somewhat of a platform where if something could be a quick win and we can do something to implement and create a best practice or create some kind of a tool for somebody to take back, then that would be value added in their job. We also talked about another aspect would be innovation. So we heard yesterday as well that we really need to grow and change and be able to modify all of our practices and everything that we do to be current. And we thought, innovation would be another really great way to do that. So we really want to encourage the Next Gen to think outside the box and maybe even use some of the research. We heard Jodie talk about there's tons of information out there for CII. We could find something from maybe 10 years ago and say, wow, that could be really applicable today if we just tweak it a little bit and bring in some of the technology tools. So that's how we really saw that going. The last thing we talked about was how could we make it more accessible? So right now it seems like to be invited to a research team, it's usually more of the experienced personnel, especially working with the colleges. And we said, what would happen if we could insert a Next Gen in there and get a new perspective and a new opportunity for them, as well as to bring a different flavor to that research team. So we said that's another thing we really want to look at is how could we possibly get the opportunities for the Next Gen coming off of the local teams as well into a research team or other opportunities? Are there ways that we could make them more accessible? Can we promote it on the website, and can we talk about emails and get people involved that way? So with that transition, I'm going to pass it off to Colin. He's going to talk a little bit further on that, exactly how we could implement and expand our knowledge base.
Thank you, Melissa. So the third priority that the Next Gen think tank talked about was how do we make CII more accessible for newcomers? And for this particular discussion, we expanded the definition of newcomers to include both next generation leaders as well as prospective members to CII, because we thought that those barriers were common. And that is what we talked about, is how do we lower that barrier to entry for newcomers to CII. I want to start the conversation by painting a backdrop using my personal experience and my personal introduction to CII. About 2 years ago, I changed roles within the company, and I needed to look up some research. So I went to the CII website and typed it in, craft productivity. Research team 252, great. That came up earlier today. That's a research team that provides a lot. Went through the search results. Hey, this is interesting. Right-click, save. Hey, this is interesting. Right-click, save. Hey, this is also interesting. Right-click, save. In about 15 minutes, I downloaded 17 PDF files, 2 Excel spreadsheets, and a handful of PowerPoint documents to go with it. This is great. That's exactly what I was hoping to find. I want the exhaustive research, that authoritative research on the topic of craft productivity. The challenge that I had was, where do I start? And this is one of those, that's a challenge that I think I had, and I think a lot of people have, and I want to address that real quick with one of those low-hanging fruits that I think we can get to. The other backdrop that I want to paint is my first experience at a CII conference, which was just a few months ago in March in San Antonio for the Technology Showcase. Walking into the CII conference, and in the midst of the transition to the CII structure with the Fiatech merger, there was a lot of discussion about the structure of CII and the communities of business advancement and the sectors and the research teams. And now that I have a bit more of an understanding of it, I can see why all that's there. But for a newcomer, it's a lot to take in. So that's the other piece of backdrop. So with that, the Next Gen think tank talked a little bit about some quick wins that we can. And I only want to spend a few seconds on this one. Some quick wins include looking at multimedia, ways of introducing newcomers to CII, such as a short 5-minute intro to the structure of CII, some of the research that's going on at CII, and how to get more involved. Videos that spotlight certain research topics, and maybe have a link that says, if you are interested in this, start with this link, go to this document, read this first. Another one is maybe podcasts that delve a little more into specific topics, which I found out this week, Continuum already does a podcast for CII, Belt Revolution, check it out. So those are some low-hanging fruits, but I want to spend the bulk of the time here, our time here, to talk about and circle back to what Jodie and Melissa brought up, which is that local connection. How do we use that local connection to lower that barrier for entry? And the way it does that is that lower commitment to entry for a newcomer. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's 3 to 5 years out of school. You found your footing in the company. You're beginning to gain some substantive responsibilities, maybe some minor leadership roles within the company. You're ready to reach out to an organization like CII to help you take that next step. You do the research, and you find there's a CII event you want to go to, and you need to have a conversation with your manager to get to that first event. One is a 2-day conference in a different city, and another is a 2-hour lunch a short drive away. Those two are very different conversations. One of them is significantly easier than the other. And that's part of what we mean by lowering that cost to entry, is making it easier for the next gen professional to get that first engagement under their belt. Having these events would also give CII the ability to market and outreach to a group of young professionals that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to engage until much later in the career. It accelerates that curve, maybe by years, maybe by a whole decade. And that's something that we don't have today. And an important part that Kelcey and Mona brought up during the session was not once in our 2 hours did we bring up video conferencing or social media. The Next Gen group valued face-to-face interaction, so it's important. And that's why we thought the local connections was important to lower that barrier to entry. So once we have these events, the focus is going to be with it. You know, we heard about that yesterday. What's in it for them? What are some things that provide value? And that's where we talk about what Melissa talked about, which is bringing up the research that the existing body of research that CII has, and asking these young professionals to engage in the research in different ways. Maybe it's engaging in some data collection. Maybe it's helping write a small white paper or proving out a pilot case. Whatever those may be, those are low commitment, short duration commitment ways for a young professional to get involved. And they can get involved in a way that doesn't necessarily require them to understand the entire structure of CII or join a committee or any of those higher commitment, higher barrier to entry things that we've gone through here. And the last thing is using that local connection as an opportunity to prepare a newcomer for a conference. Imagine if before your first conference you had a 2-hour get-together at a local venue where you can get the orientation to CII. What is the structure of CII? What are the different research teams? What can you participate in when you're here? Those are all valuable things, and I'm sure all of you in the audience, being on the committees and the sectors that you're in, you have ideas of what you would tell someone about if you had that opportunity before they got here to help paint that picture for them so that they can hit the ground running on day one. And I think the biggest opportunity that comes from having that local connection before an event like this is the networking. I'm a bit of an introvert, so this one particularly hits home for me, is when I go to that first conference, when I walk into that opening session, I'm not walking into a room full of strangers. I'm going to an event with a bunch of friends. And that is what's going to lower the barrier to entry. And with that, I want to pass the floor back to Kelcey and Mona.
Thank you, Colin. This was an excellent summary of the 3 priorities that we identified. And before I go into re-summarizing some of the next steps, I want to start with age is nothing but a number. As some of my mentors who are in their 70s, 60s, and 50s will say to me, you've got to stay fresh and you've got to stay open. I think sometimes we tend to think of Next Gen as a source of innovation, but actually all the activities that we've suggested today are not fully possible without your mentorship and support. So these local connections that we're talking about now require not only younger professionals, if you will, to participate, but we need people coming in like yourselves who have seen a lot of different things, who have the cultivated wisdom and have the energy. And that's the big thing I think that's come out of all of the panelists today, is that there's a lot of energy here and there's a lot of desire to go out and connect. I want to summarize again that this is not a separate initiative. This is a complementary initiative. The team came together, and I think it's actually quite remarkable. We were talking about this earlier. It was a team of 20 to 30 people sitting down in a room Monday afternoon, most of whom had actually never worked together or met together before. And then we had a very tight 2-hour time frame to come up with these priorities and distill them into something that was both valuable and immediately actionable. So if we were able to do that in a 2-hour session and get up here today with very short time for preparation and putting this together, I do believe it's possible. And I think it's something that we can replicate on the local level. Again, we already have volunteers in the Washington, D.C. area, Houston, Texas, and San Francisco, California. So that means there's opportunities for Chicago and many other regions where you may want to get involved. And please go ahead and nominate somebody who's on your team, or nominate yourselves as well. We just need somebody to raise their hands and want to put some of these things together. One of the other recommendations that we actually had too was establishing some connectivity between this Next Gen think tank, if you will, and the strategic planning committee. So maybe even just having somebody from that team of 20 to 30 people who came on Monday afternoon, go ahead and sit in some of those meetings, provide feedback, and also provide a report out back to us. And then again, the quick hit videos or media. Again, this is not a social media presence thing, but it is one of those tools that you can go back and use for your team. Sometimes, I think as many of the panelists brought up, it's a little bit difficult to simply and quickly distill the wealth of information and resources that have been developed over the last, I guess, 35 years now at CII since its founding in 1983. And again, Next Gen is a mindset and not an age. not an age. And so with that, I'd like to open the floor up to Q&A. I think we're going to be going ahead and taking it through the app.
Yeah. So I'm just scrolling through. A couple of these came in already. Here's the first one that we can start off with. We've got CII had a Next Gen. Is it going to pop up on the screen for me? Or does it just go away when I click on it? We'll start with a different one. So would your Next Gen local groups have to be associated with a member company, or are you considering a broader reach to encourage diversity and participation?
I'll speak to that one. We've actually discussed both. So we thought it's very easy for a member company to open their office and invite the others who are local. We've also discussed partnering with the local universities. We have excellent relationships there. And the third thing that we discussed was not necessarily recreating the wheel every time, but also working with another local organization, ASCE or otherwise, and partnering with them with a local event.
Awesome. So the next one is CII had a Next Gen group, including its own community of practice. It sunsetted. Is this a new group, community, CBA, et cetera? And what's the path forward?
That's a great question, and I would say that this can be whatever makes sense. So there's been some discussion about making it a CBA. I think the bottom line is keep the energy going. We have this informal group right now. It's not very difficult to go ahead. Jodie and I actually live in DC, and so we said, oh, in the next couple weeks, maybe we'll set something up. And we already have a location. Eric volunteered Houston. This is not complicated, but it's continuing the momentum, capturing the media from those sessions, and inspiring others. I think that's something that's continually come up during this conference. Be inspired. I think that's maybe the big goal of the group, because we were talking about this yesterday. All of us are pretty close to aging out of the quote-unquote next-gen status. But as long as we can keep pulling people in and pollinating them with ideas, hopefully that this group is actually just a constantly evolving thing, and new people come in and replace us.
So this next one is, I think, an interesting question, and this came up a lot on Monday when we were talking. What about collaboration with the Curt Young Professionals group? So do any of you want to kind of share our conversation about that on Monday?
Yeah, we can talk about it. We talked about actually just partnering with other young professional groups as well, so CMAA, Curt, others. Really, as Jenny Bien had said, and many other leaders in CII was founded on collaboration, so hey, why not?
So how do we contact the Next Gen team?
Great question.
That's a great question.
From a starting point, we'll all be here right after the session. We're the only thing between you guys and lunch right now, so we'll be out in the hallway. Please feel free to come find us, get our contact information. As we said, this was a 2-hour discussion on Monday afternoon. It is a very grassroots effort. We are just getting started. And so as we start to put together those platforms, and to answer another one of the questions on here, which is how do we find out about the local meetings? But as we start to build this team and figure out what our charter is and what our next steps are and how we're going to work together to make these local meetings start to happen, I would say, we're happy to be your point people to make sure that if you are interested in being engaged, that you can get on those lists, that you're going to be aware of the things that are coming up, and you have a way to get engaged.
And I'll just reiterate, we definitely intend for this to be hand in hand with the larger CII staff and organization. So we hope that through the normal communications that you receive, and then the access that they have to the membership pool, the right communications will get to the right people.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So we have an interesting one here. Have you thought about asking each CII member to nominate at least one employee to participate fully in CII at the Fall Board of Advisors virtual meeting? So is that something that you guys, that any of you, that's not something that came up in our discussion on Monday, but do any of you have any sort of information about how we would get a younger person engaged in that Board of Advisors meeting? Are there restrictions around who can participate or attend?
The Board of Advisor role is very specific within CII, so we'd have to discuss that in terms of whether or not that's appropriate, but the more the merrier. We'll have to ask Malva in terms of the executing on that, but that might be an opportunity to bring people in. But again, if you create a community of business advancement or a CBA for the next gen, and then populate that, and then we'll find a way to structure getting people more involved with the various committees, including the board of advisors.
Okay.
Kelcey, I can expand on that a little bit. I'm actually on the board of advisors. I attended my first meeting in March. I was nominated based on attrition. So the person who served in board of advisors at my company retired. It's the next woman up policy. So I was there. So I'm more than happy to be that connection as well, since it was my first time and it's a little overwhelming for the first time. So if there's something, again, as people are coming on board and you're leaving Next Gen and going to board of advisors, if we can do similar to what Colin said, some kind of transition, slideshow package or something, kind of orientation, that would be great. So I'm happy to help in any way I can with that connection.
I want to jump in on that one as well. Within FLIR, we have a subject matter expert program, and one of the successes of that program is we've partnered each subject matter expert with a young protege to shepherd them to that path towards technical expertise, and that's a program that has brought a lot of value, and I would see this as an opportunity for a similar type of program to be instituted where committee members, sector members, and whatnot bring a protege with them to help with whatever capacities then those may be.
I think we'd want to encourage every CII member company to nominate one or two people to participate, at least one or two people to participate in the Next Gen program, right?
Absolutely.
And we see those local connection opportunities as an easy way to do that. It's easier to invite someone a couple years out of school to a lunch down the road than coordinating them coming to conference. And hopefully that momentum could be gained and we'll see more presence. But we see that as the immediate opportunity to address that.
Absolutely.
So how would a person in the Next Gen pool get involved if their company is not here or not already a member of CII?
You got to be a member.
Well, we'd certainly hope that by participating in one of these local connects that we would help somebody build the business
The
case.
recruiting.
Exactly.
Right.
Because there is a lot of value to be derived from member companies, and CII grows stronger with all member input. So.
That's what I did. I got my company, Deloitte, to be members last year because I was involved with CII years before and thought that it was important. I made the business case and have full support from all of my colleagues.
Yeah, and that's what that local connections group is really going to bring that with it, right? What's in it for them, and not just for the individual, but for the companies involved. And that's where we said that barrier to entry applies to both newcomers and prospective members. So maybe it's both at the same time. We definitely had Brendan, one of the Next Gen think tank team members, was both a Next Gen and a prospective member. So that's a perfect example of how a local connection could achieve both goals.
Awesome. And that goes to the next question here, which is, do you envision local connections as a way to introduce young employees of prospective companies to learn about CII and potentially join? And I think the answer to that is absolutely.
Yep.
That was, one of the challenges that we were trying to solve for, is how do we engage more people? How do we make that barrier to entry lower, as Colin was talking about?
Yeah, individuals that otherwise would not get a chance to come to a CII event can come to a CII event, and not just video conferencing. There's value in that, but there's also value in face-to-face, and that's what this really brings.
And I think it goes back to, we talked about earlier, there was a comment about the young professionals. This is a good example where you're going to have companies there that aren't members of CII, similar to other organizations like AACE. I know we have a chapter here in Indianapolis. There'll be companies and people who attend that will be able to inform them of what's going on with CII when we partner, and that will, I think, automatically bring in some more questions and some interest.
Great. So this question is interesting to me. We have younger people in senior roles now that are leaders already and wouldn't think of themselves as Next Gen. How do we address them? And they gave an example. At the most notable level, Brendan Bechtel, he's of course engaged as a leader. He is a millennial. So he may not be the best example as he's already a leader, but how do we engage those people and address them and bring them in?
Well, we had a conversation about what we would call ourselves. And all of us really didn't care for that young leader wording because of that right there. We thought Next Gen was appropriate because we're Next Gen, but we also talked, there's a Next Gen behind us already who have graduated in the past 10 years that isn't even us. So there's always going to be a Next Gen, and that speaks to what Mona was saying too. We really don't want to lock it in as much about age or experience level, but just continually looking at the up-and-coming people within our firms.
Exactly.
I think Melissa brought up a very relevant point, and I'm in the same boat as her. I'm on a committee with CII, and that's because of, for lack of a better word, attrition. Creating this local connections would create new leadership opportunities within CII that aren't necessarily board of advisor or strategic planning committee, but it gives that, again, a lower barrier to entry for someone who's looking to take an active engagement role in CII without, again, necessarily coming to a 2-day conference to do it.
Yeah. And I'll say that on Monday afternoon, this group, one of the bigger concerns that came up was actually the opposite of that. We looked around the room and we said, okay, there was a cap, an age cap placed on the invitation to participate in this session on Monday afternoon. And everybody was kind of at the upper end. Like most of us that were in the room on Monday, if we were to enforce that age cap, we would age out of it pretty quickly. And there wasn't that younger group. And so how do we get that level engaged? How do we bring the really new to their career people in, those who are just out of college, or those who are working in trades even?
Because case in point, Deloitte is now a member because Jodie was involved with CII more than 8 years ago.
Keep it a mindset, not necessarily an age thing.
Exactly. Age is nothing but a number.
And not only that, but it's the next generation of technology. It's the next generation of what we do capital projects-wise, right? And so I think if you guys can bring that energy to the table, that'll be awesome to bring a group in that gets the innovative ideas and brings that into here and be the feelers out there in terms of what's new, what's next, what's coming up, and bring that back to CII so it's fresh and constant, and the next generation of this is prepared, right? So.
And I'll add, I've talked with several people who are members here who they're the main point of contact for their whole company for CII. And you pay a corporate membership. It's not, take advantage of that. You can include more of your staff, get people involved. It's not additional cost, especially if there are local opportunities. It really will hopefully help you do your job better by being that connection point to share that and help others help you in that.
Exactly.
Awesome. So just last question here before we wrap up in case anybody has any other kind of conversation points or discussion items. Again, we will be back in the hallway afterward. Come find us, chat with us on the way over to lunch.
VIP area.
Yeah. So, will the Next Gen community embrace young craft professionals, carpenters, ironworkers, et cetera, and how?
Absolutely. That actually came up during our discussion with the think tank team was how do we engage people in the crafts? Send them our way. Spread the word. During the local meetings, include everyone. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some outreach there too.
We would be remiss not to.
I know that there are many folks in the audience too who may be able to make that happen.
Yeah, and again, we talked a lot about the intersection and collaboration with other existing groups. There are a lot of local groups that are already operating. There are young professionals groups at organizations like CURT. There are groups like CMAA that do local lunches. And then also, of course, unions and associations in that area. And so that intersection and being able to work with those existing networks and to collaborate with them, I think will be a great way to engage people.
That's something I will personally work on.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for hearing our report out. There's a lot of energy and a lot of excitement around this whole effort, this next generation group, and what that's going to look like. And so please stay tuned, engage with us, connect with us, and we will keep you posted on next steps.